It was Christmas Eve, and the idea of being surrounded by happy couples and warm holiday cheer felt suffocating. But her parents insisted. "It's polite," her mom said. "You can't just stay home all night." So Mia dressed up and walked next door. The house smelled amazing, like cinnamon and something sweet, and the decorations looked perfect. Everything about Sarah's home screamed effort, from the twinkling lights to the perfectly plated cookies. Mia plastered on a smile as Sarah greeted her. Perfect. Everything about Sarah's home screamed effort, from the twinkling lights to the perfectly plated cookies. Mia plastered on a smile as Sarah greeted her. "Hi, Mia. Glad you made it." Sarah's warmth was genuine, but it only made Mia feel worse. "Thanks for having me," Mia said, her voice light. She moved quickly into the room, avoiding too much eye contact. Her stomach churned. Tom was there, of course, standing by the fireplace, blending into the crowd. He looked casual, like he didn't have a care in the world, but Mia saw past that. She knew him too well now. She wished she didn't. She avoided him at first, keeping to the edges of the party, but she felt his eyes on her. It was the same look he always gave her, the one that made her feel both noticed and invisible at the same time. Mia kept busy chatting with neighbors, nibbling on cookies she didn't want, but Tom kept looking, and then he was close, too close. He didn't say much, just a quiet hey as they crossed paths in the kitchen. It was enough to make her chest tighten. "Hey," she whispered back, barely meeting his eyes before rushing out. The room felt too small after that. Every time Mia tried to leave, someone stopped her, offering a drink, asking about school, complimenting her dress. She smiled and nodded, but her mind was spinning. Why did she ever let this happen? Why didn't she stop it when she had the chance? Mia saw the moment Sarah noticed something was wrong. Her hostess smile faltered as she watched Tom glance at Mia one time too many. Sarah wasn't stupid. She was kind, loving, and generous, but not stupid. Mia's heart sank. She wanted to disappear, to undo everything, but it was too late. As the party thinned out, the tension thickened. Sarah approached Tom with a quiet question, her voice sharp under the surface. Mia didn't hear what she said, but she saw the look on Sarah's face, and then Sarah turned, her gaze locking onto Mia. Mia froze. The whole room seemed to go silent, even though people were still talking, laughing, unaware of the storm brewing. In that moment, Mia knew there was no escaping it now. Tom leaned against the door frame, his voice low as he spoke to Mia. He didn't even know what he was saying. Small talk, excuses, anything to keep the air calm. But he could feel Sarah's presence from across the room, like a storm about to hit. When he glanced over, she was watching, her face unreadable but her eyes sharp. Mia shifted beside him, glancing towards Sarah too. She looked nervous, almost panicked, but Tom stayed still. Maybe he thought he could smooth things over later, convince Sarah it was nothing. But deep down, he knew better. Then Sarah walked over, calm, steady, but there was something in her voice when she said their names. Tom, Mia. His chest tightened. He straightened up, trying to act normal, but the look on Sarah's face stopped him cold. "Is there something you two need to talk about?" The noise in the house seemed to fade, like the room had shrunk around them. Tom felt heat rising in his face, but he couldn't move. He couldn't speak. Sarah's words were calm, but they cut straight through him. Mia flushed red, looking at the floor, and Tom tried to find something, anything to say. But before he could, Sarah's voice came again, sharper now. "What's going on here?" Tom froze. His mind raced for an explanation, a way to make this disappear, but nothing came. The truth sat between them like a weight, impossible to ignore. Then Sarah said, I know about you and Mia." The air left his lungs. He glanced at Mia, but she didn't look back. Her shoulders hunched as if she wanted to vanish. He looked at Sarah, and the anger in her eyes hit him harder than any words could. "Sarah, it's not," he started, but she didn't let him finish. "Don't lie to me, Tom," she snapped, her voice rising. "I trusted you all these years. I believed in you. And this? With her?" She pointed at Mia, her voice breaking. Tom's throat tightened. He wanted to deny it, to make it all go away. But there was no point. Sarah wasn't letting him off the hook, and he didn't deserve it. The guests were gathering now, their murmurs blending with the hum of the kitchen lights. Tom barely noticed. All he could see was Sarah. Hurt, betrayed, furious. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she said, her voice trembling. "You've destroyed everything." Tom couldn't argue. He couldn't defend himself. He just stood there, feeling the weight of his choices press down on him like a stone. He had made this mess, and now there was no fixing it. Sarah turned toward the guests, her voice loud and clear. "I think we're done here," she said, her tone final. Tom watched as she walked away, leaving him standing there, his world crumbling around him. He wanted to call out to her, to explain, to beg, but he knew it wouldn't matter. Sarah was done, and so was everything they had built. The house was eerily quiet as the door clicked shut behind the last guest. Sarah stood rooted in the middle of the room, the air heavy with tension. The joyful hum of the party, the last ringing tones of the guest. The joyful hum of the party, the last ringing tones of the last guest. Her breath came in short bursts, her chest rising and falling as the enormity of what had just unfolded began to settle over her. Tom hadn't moved. He stood by the door like a statue, his face a blend of guilt and disbelief. Sarah's neighbor's daughter, Mia, had already slinked away, her footsteps fading into nothingness. But Mia was the least of Sarah's concerns now. No, all her focus, all her rage was directed at the man she had loved for so many years, the man she had built her life with. How could he do this? How could he betray her trust so utterly, so publicly? She turned to him slowly, her eyes glinting with a mixture of heartbreak and fury. Her voice came out trembling but sharp. "So, what now, Tom? Are you going to tell me it's all a mistake? That this isn't real?" Tom's shoulders slumped and he looked down as if ashamed to meet her gaze. "Sarah, I'm sorry," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did." Sarah let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "It just happened?" she spat, her voice dripping with disbelief. "You don't just accidentally fall into someone else's bed, Tom. You don't cheat because it just happens." Her words sliced through the space between them, sharp and unrelenting. Tom flinched, but didn't respond. "You made a choice," she continued, stepping closer, her fists clenched at her sides. "You chose to lie to me, to betray me. You knew exactly what you were doing. Don't stand there and pretend this was some kind of accident." Tom's face reddened as he opened his mouth to speak, but she cut him off before he could form a word. "And don't even try to tell me it was just a fling," she hissed, her voice rising. "I saw the way you looked at her tonight. How long has this been going on, Tom? Months? Years? How many times have I ignored the signs, told myself it was nothing? How many lies have you told me?" The weight of her accusations hung in the air, pressing down on both of them. Tom finally managed to speak, his voice trembling. "I didn't want to hurt you, Sarah. I never wanted this to happen." She laughed again, the sound bitter and hollow. "You never wanted this," she echoed. "Well, congratulations, Tom. You sure as hell made it happen." Her voice cracked, the raw pain breaking through the anger for just a moment. "You've been lying to me for months, and I didn't see it. I didn't want to see it." Tom reached out, his hand trembling as he tried to touch her arm, but she jerked away. "Don't touch me," she snapped, her voice shaking with fury. "I don't want your apologies, Tom. I don't want anything from you right now." She turned away from him, her hands gripping the edge of the counter as she tried to steady her breathing. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and confusion. How had she missed it? The late nights, the secretive texts, the way he had grown distant. It had all been there, right in front of her. But she had trusted him, believed in him, and he had shattered that trust completely. Tom's voice broke through her thoughts again, desperate now. "Sarah, please, I made a terrible mistake, and I'm so sorry. We can fix this, please. Don't do this. Don't throw everything away." She spun around to face him, her eyes blazing. "Don't throw everything away?" she repeated, her voice incredulous. "You're the one who destroyed everything, Tom. You don't get to ruin my life and then beg me to forgive you with a few hollow words." Her voice steadied, her resolve hardening as she stared him down. "You made your choice, and I'm done." Tom's expression shifted, his eyes wide, almost pleading. But Sarah wasn't going to fall for it, not this time. She had spent too long ignoring the signs, making excuses for him, convincing herself that their life was perfect. But it wasn't. It never had been. She took a deep breath, her chest tight with emotion, and walked past him toward the door. "I need space, Tom. I need time to think," she said, her voice cold and resolute. "You can't fix this with a few tears and empty promises. You can't undo what you've done." She stopped at the doorway, turning back to look at him one last time. "You've already shown me who you are, and I believe you." With that, she stepped out into the cold night. The chill hit her immediately, biting at her skin, but she didn't care. She stood there on the porch, staring out into the darkness, her breath visible in the frosty air. Her world had just been turned upside down, shattered in a way she could never have imagined. She didn't know what came next. She didn't know how she would rebuild the life that had been so thoroughly destroyed. But she did know one thing: she wasn't going to let this betrayal define her. She wasn't going to let Tom's actions break her completely. The night was cold and unforgiving, but as Sarah stood there, she felt something stir deep within her, a flicker of strength, a spark of resilience. She didn't know where it would lead her, but she knew she would find a way to move forward. Sarah had reached the breaking point. She couldn't continue being the fool, no matter how much Tom begged. The cold air hit her sharply as she stepped outside, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Everything around her felt alien. The holiday lights flickering in the distance, the empty house still echoing from the guests who had just left. Her heart ached with the weight of betrayal, and she stood there, frozen, unsure of what to do next. Her phone buzzed, snapping her from her thoughts. It was Karen, asking if she was okay. But Sarah couldn't bring herself to reply. She needed space. She needed time to process everything that had just shattered in front of her. Her marriage, her trust, her life. Inside, Tom was waiting, no doubt regretting his actions, ready to beg for forgiveness. But Sarah knew better now. This wasn't something that could be fixed with another apology or another empty promise. The betrayal ran too deep. Her love for him was still there, but it had been twisted beyond repair. He sat on the couch, broken, his tears painting a picture of desperation. But Sarah stood firm. She couldn't keep living in this cycle of lies and deceit. She had heard it all before, his promises of change, his apologies after every betrayal, but nothing ever changed. "I'm done," she said, her voice steady but full of sorrow. "I need space. I need to figure this out on my own." The following days were a blur of isolation. Sarah stayed in the house, surrounded by remnants of what had once been a celebration. Every corner seemed to whisper of the lies Tom had told, the trust he had broken. Her mind swirled with anger, grief, and disbelief. She didn't know where to go from here. But as the days wore on, a sense of clarity started to take hold. She couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. She couldn't stay in a marriage built on lies, not when the truth had been exposed so brutally. She needed to move on for her own sanity, for her own future. It wasn't an easy decision. She had spent years with Tom, sharing a life, building memories, but all of it felt like a lie now. So, one evening, Sarah sat at the kitchen table and wrote everything down. Every painful truth, every broken promise, every moment that had led her here. She didn't know exactly what the future would hold, but she knew she had to take control of her life again. It wasn't until days later that she found the strength to face Tom again. He was still apologizing, still begging. But Sarah stood firm. "I can't trust you anymore," she told him. "I can't keep living like this." Her heart ached, but she knew it was the right decision. Tom's face fell, but Sarah didn't waver. "I need time," she said. "I need space. I don't know what comes next, but I can't keep doing this." She wasn't ready to forgive him, not yet, and maybe never. But she needed to move forward. The following weeks were filled with silence, with painful reflection, and with slow healing. Sarah found herself starting to rebuild her life. She focused on her kids, on herself, on rediscovering who she was without the shadow of Tom's betrayal hanging over her. Slowly, with the support of friends like Karen, Sarah began to see the possibility of a future beyond the pain. Then came the decision, the one that would define everything. As she looked through old family photos, memories of a life she had thought was real, she realized she couldn't go back. She sent a simple message to Tom, asking to talk. When he arrived, she didn't yell, didn't blame him. She simply told him, "It's time for us to go our separate ways." The silence that followed was heavy, but Sarah felt a strange peace wash over her. This was the end of a chapter, but it was the beginning of something new. In the weeks that followed, Sarah began to rebuild her life, one step at a time. She found comfort in the small things, her morning walks, the laughter of her children, and the support of friends who reminded her that she wasn't alone. She wasn't seeking a new relationship, but for the first time in a long while, she felt whole again. The past no longer had control over her. Sarah had learned that forgiveness wasn't always about letting someone back in. Sometimes it was about letting go. She was no longer weighed down by the past. The future was hers to define, and she was ready to face it head-on.